It is day 2 on the trail, and cheers. I'm enjoying my morning drink here. So this is something else new. This is matcha with 2 tablespoons of coconut powder and a turmeric capsule. So I found these matcha packets at Wegmans, which is a supermarket chain on the East Coast. Matcha on the go, gotta have it in life. So I'm trying matcha this time. I tried instant coffee on the Arizona Trail, and the flavor was just nowhere close to a real cup of coffee. So shout out to my friend Sarah. When I was at the Grand Canyon, she showed me her whole matcha routine, and it dissolves right in the water. So I feel like I'm at least getting the real deal here. And my other friend Andrew told me about all the health benefits of matcha, supposedly. So that's that. And then I got these little turmeric capsules, also just from a supermarket. So I just opened up one of those and put it in the drink. And those are supposed to have anti-inflammatory benefits. So again, my friend Courtney, she's training to be a physical therapist, and she told me how certain spices or natural supplements have actual provable benefits, and that's one of them. So that's kind of new for me, so we'll see. Today, as far as this blog goes, I want to get more into these more fundamental topics of again, why is everyone working all the time, and what can we actually do about this? So I'm going to be giving you my perspective on these issues today. I want to get into this this topic of why are we all working so much, and how did this happen? So why do we work? I mean, for me, it was mostly just to make money. Maybe some people have jobs that are meaningful or gratifying to you in some way, but at the end of the day, a lot of us are doing this for the paycheck because, like I said, we need money for everything. We need money for food and shelter. So we have to work for money, and we need to talk about inflation because why is our paycheck going less and less? And if the opposite was happening, if our money was worth more and more over time, we wouldn't have to work so much to afford just basic necessities of life. So to understand inflation, you need to understand why that's happening. And this is a problem with the money that we're using, which is the US dollar. So why is the US dollar losing value over time? Basically, you need to understand what controls the value of the dollar, and that's the Federal Reserve. So we have this system where we have a central bank in the United States that's called the Federal Reserve, and they meet like 8 times a year, and they basically just decide how much the US dollar is going to be worth based on these interest rates that they control arbitrarily. So there's 12 people who decide whether or not to raise interest rates, and they also decide other stuff. So after the 2008 financial crisis, the economy was basically at a standstill. There was really no money left because the banks had borrowed so much money to make risky bets that all went the wrong way that they were out of cash. So we were potentially looking at just a bank run in this country and no more money to lend out. So all economic activity basically would have stopped. Everyone might have lost access to their money in a bank account. So the government's like, well, what are we going to do here? And the thing about the Federal Reserve is that they can just create money out of thin air. So the Federal Reserve, they can create dollars. They have that special ability to do that, which no other entity can. So what they did was they just basically said, we are just going to start creating money out of thin air and bail out the banks. And that's what they did. So just think about it logically. If you have X amount of dollars out there and the Federal Reserve decides to double that, it wasn't that much, but say they increase the amount of outstanding dollars by like 20 or 30%. What do you think is going to happen to the value of the dollar? It's going to go down because if you have $1, you basically own a share of the outstanding dollars. And if that outstanding share gets bigger and bigger, you own less and less a percentage of the outstanding dollars. So this is why inflation is happening, because the Federal Reserve keeps bailing out these large financial institutions anytime they run into a problem. And during the pandemic, they actually created, I think it was $6 trillion, which, according to the official statistics of how much money is out there, that $6 trillion it represented a 40% increase in the amount of dollars that exists. So now we have this huge inflation problem because they're giving all that money away to, again, these big financial institutions, and those financial institutions are basically turning around and investing that money. So they're buying up all these assets that they think could go up in value eventually, and nobody else got that money. The stimulus checks that went out during the pandemic was like a small fraction. I think that whole program cost $500 billion. So these other large financial institutions got way more money than that, and they just turn around and buy up assets. So, for example, the housing market, we're at a record level of the number of investors that are buying houses. So if you're a regular person and you're just trying to buy a house to live in and raise a family, you're competing against these institutions that are getting preferential treatment by the Federal Reserve. So this gets to the root of the whole problem, which is that our money is controlled by human beings who have the ability to make arbitrary decisions over who they give that money to and if they create this money. So that's a big problem. And all this money is getting handed out to, again, these big financial institutions, and everyone else is just kind of not doing anything differently, but your paycheck is worth less and less over time. So this is why we have inflation, and I think this is a big part of why everyone is working so much. Because so I was talking about this with shout out to my friend Katie. She brought up a great point, which is that the 40-hour work week was meant for just one spouse to work 40 hours, and the other partner would be able to do other stuff like basic necessities of life, like shopping for groceries or doing laundry or cooking healthy meals and stuff. And that's just not possible anymore with the economics of everything. Both people have to work, and it's like, okay, so now you send your kid to daycare and that's costing $2,000 a month. So the end result of all this is just that I think this has crept up on us over time, and it's really because I'm taking this time off from work that I guess I'm realizing it more, that everyone is just working. And even when I catch people on the weekend or something, it's like you need a break to mentally recover from work, and people just need time to take care of basic necessities of life, and then they have all these other people in their life who they want to spend time with. And the question is just like, how long are we going to keep going like this? And is it just going to keep getting worse? I mean, this Federal Reserve System, I just think inevitably there's going to be some other crisis that they're going to have to bail out some financial institution again. And the whole inflation problem could just keep getting worse. And it's like, well, what do we want our lives to be? Are we just here to make a paycheck, or are we here to enjoy life and to love each other? And that's really what we are here to do, is to make the most of this beautiful planet that we live on and take advantage of having all these beautiful people in our lives who can make our life really enjoyable. So that's getting ripped away from us right now because of this whole money thing. So that's the problem as I see it. And so what's the solution to all this? I mean, so on one level, it's like the money itself is a problem because we have this arbitrary system where a small group of people decide the value of the dollar. So one solution that's out there for that is Bitcoin, which is an open source piece of software that runs on just regular people's computers all over the planet. So if you're familiar with what BitTorrent is, it's basically a file sharing system, which is very hard for, like, so people share like MP3 files on there illegally, but it's very hard for like music companies to shut down BitTorrent, because BitTorrent, there's no central server that they can like issue a subpoena for. BitTorrent just runs on people's computers all over the planet, and everyone has a little piece of each file on their computer. So Bitcoin kind of runs the same way. There's no centralized Bitcoin server. It's running on these things called nodes, which if you have a computer, you can run a node. It doesn't require any special hardware. And the nodes, they are basically running the Bitcoin software, and they also have a total copy of what's called the blockchain, which is, it's a total history of every single Bitcoin transaction that's ever happened since Bitcoin was started in 2009. So every 10 minutes, there's a new block of transactions that gets added. That's why it's called a blockchain. And this has been happening every 10 minutes since 2009. And it just records what address is sending how much Bitcoin to what other address. That's it. And so these nodes validate that those transactions are valid. And then the blockchain, you know, it's probably several hundred gigabytes. So again, you don't need special hardware to run this thing. So the other part of this is that, well, how are these transactions getting processed, and who decides what transactions go through? So the way that works is this, it's called proof of work. It's called mining. And so basically, this gets beyond my understanding a little bit. It relies on cryptography, but there's basically a very large random number that people are competing all over the world to guess what that number is. And there's no way to guess it other than just literally guessing and checking. So it's just a numbers game. The more guesses you can make per second at this large random number, the better chance you have at actually guessing it. So people just buy, so at first you could just do that on any computer, but now that Bitcoin is so popular, there's specialized machines just to make guesses at this number. So the network always gets recalibrated. So the more guesses are happening per second, the difficulty of that number goes up. So it's always going to take about 10 minutes for that number to be guessed. So how does that secure the network? I mean, basically it's just a free-for-all. So there's no special preference for who wins, who guesses that number. It's just like winning the lottery, basically. And the cost that all these miners have is just electricity, because they're just powering these machines that are guessing these numbers. So that is why Bitcoin uses a lot of energy, is it's just powering computers guessing at a random number, which the whole thing seems kind of bizarre. But the end result of all this is that whoever guesses that number gets to add the next block of transactions to the blockchain. And for doing that, they get transaction fees, which you have to pay to send Bitcoin from one address to another. And then they also get an arbitrary amount of Bitcoin from the Bitcoin protocol. So right now that's about 3 Bitcoins. Before April, that was 6. So then this halving thing happens every 4 years, where that number of Bitcoin gets cut in half. So the reason behind that is that it's getting away from the system that we have right now with the Federal Reserve, where, again, the small group of people can basically, a small number of people can basically, like, I mean, they can double the money supply, you know, whenever they want to. The other thing about the Federal Reserve is that we don't even really know how much money they're creating, because they've never been audited. So this is actually a big problem. And Ron Paul ran for president in 2008, and so he wanted to go back to the gold standard for all these, because of all these issues with the Federal Reserve. And one of his big campaign promises was to audit the Federal Reserve. So imagine that we have the ability to, they basically have unlimited power, because money can pretty much buy anything in our society, and they have zero accountability whatsoever. And as an example of this, Bernie Sanders actually after the 2008 financial crisis, he somehow got a partial audit of the Federal Reserve of just the money that was given out for the bailout. And what they found was that the Federal Reserve had actually given out $16 trillion that we never would have known about otherwise. And a lot of that money went to foreign banks. So that's a huge problem. And if you don't believe me, I just Google Bernie Sanders, Federal Reserve, 16 trillion, and I'm not making that up. So we don't even really know how much money the Federal Reserve is creating and handing out to whoever, you know. It's realistically, it's probably just going to their friends. Most of this board of 12 people who decide all these things come from the banks. So Jerome Powell, for example, I mean, you know, these are not representing the interests of just human beings. They're representing the interests of the quote-unquote economy. And that's their background. So that's a huge problem. And our government could do some stuff about this politically if they wanted to. I mean, they could shut down the entire Federal Reserve if they really wanted to. It's just, this never gets talked about to the degree that it should. I had to learn about this just by watching these like alternative economists on, this one guy, Max Kaiser, on Russia Today. I learned a lot from him. And Peter Schiff is really into gold. So he basically criticizes the Federal Reserve like this, but if you read the Wall Street Journal or mainstream financial media, they're not going to say any of this stuff. And I just think it's because they don't really want to buck the status quo too much. And this raises uncomfortable questions. So how Bitcoin solves this problem is that by this halving mechanism, at some point, that arbitrary reward that the miners get is going to be zero about 100 years from now. And at that point, the miners will just get the transaction fees, and there will be 21 million Bitcoins, and that number can never increase. So this is how Bitcoin fights inflation, because when you buy Bitcoin, you own a share of the outstanding Bitcoin, and that share will never go down. It might go up because people are constantly losing Bitcoin, which can happen. So that's kind of that in a nutshell. Now, how this relates to me and how I want to start solving this problem is that, you know, I was kind of on top of this whole Federal Reserve thing since 2012, because that's when I had spent some time in a very poor part of Philadelphia. And I went there to volunteer at a community for people recovering from drug and alcohol addiction. It was really my first time like spending time in, I guess it was like the ghetto basically. This was part of our society that's basically been completely abandoned by our politicians and really mainstream society. Everyone's just kind of left to manage on their own with really no resources. And this was all a huge eye-opener to me. I grew up in suburban Philadelphia, and I never had any problems having enough food to eat or feeling secure. And when I went there to Philadelphia, I mean, there were people there's people that don't have enough food to eat, because the program I was in, they did this monthly food handout, and people were like lined up. This really stayed in my mind, how many people lined up on a very cold morning in November, like an hour or two ahead of when we were handing the food out, to get that food. And it's like, they wouldn't be there if they didn't want to, you know. A, it's just who wants to be in that position, and B, like the elements that they were dealing with to get that food. It just solidified to me that they really do need that. And that's not acceptable. So we shouldn't have people starving, especially when we supposedly live in the wealthiest country in the world. And probably we are the wealthiest country, but it's like, where is that wealth, and what's the cost of having these fantastically wealthy people? And it's basically everyone else just suffers, and daily life becomes a struggle for survival. So I became very interested to learn why that is the case. And I did a lot of research, and it took a long time for me to stumble upon this answer, which was that wealthy people get preferential treatment by the government via the Federal Reserve, because at the time, interest rates were zero if you're a big bank, and student loans were 6%. So why is it that these financial institutions get better treatment they get more favorable terms by the government than regular human beings who are actually trying to like go to school and improve themselves. And if you get a credit card, I mean, you're paying minimum 11%, you know, so why is this a publicly funded profit-making industry? So that's the root of the problem. I became convinced that was the whole issue. So that's why I was reading about the Federal Reserve in the first place, just to understand how our society came to be this way and why we have these very serious poverty issues. It's basically a humanitarian crisis that's happening every single day all over the country that nobody ever talks about. This should be the number one priority for our society is to fix this thing. And instead, they're just worried about very surface level, like political arguments, and they're never talking about these real core issues, which are actually affecting everyone's life every day. So that's kind of all the background and my take on this problem and why it's happening. And I told you about Bitcoin, which that could maybe solve the money issue, but there's a bigger problem in all of this, which is just these social ties that can make us happy or not are disappearing because we just have to work all the time. So how do we get at that actual problem? And so how this all relates to me is that I was sitting there in 2020 during the pandemic watching the Federal Reserve hand out $6 trillion. And for the first time in my life, I actually had extra money in my bank account that I wasn't going to spend in the next 6 months. And the interest rates on my savings account, they got cut to zero because of all the emergency pandemic stuff. And I'm like, I'm not going to just sit there and watch inflation take my savings away. So in good times, inflation is supposed to be 2%. That's the Federal Reserve's target. And if you stop and think about what that really means, they, by policy, that's totally transparent, this is not a secret, they are trying to, their goal is to make your money worth 2% less every single year, your US dollars. They're basically stealing money from all of us all the time, and it's all legal and accepted. And that's not acceptable to me. You know, I worked really hard to get that money, and I don't want to just let all that effort and time go to nothing. So I took a huge risk and I bought Bitcoin for the first time. And that was really scary because, you know, Bitcoin's a new technology. I mean, that could really go to zero. There could be bugs that people don't know about, or anything could happen really. But I felt like it was worth the risk. Given my financial position at the time, I didn't have any debt. I had a lot of money saved up. And I had a career where I could easily I had a job at the time and where I could get a new one easily. So it made sense to me to take a risk on that thing. And I basically just took that approach. Like most of the money I wasn't going to spend in the next 6 months, I just started buying Bitcoin with eventually. And so I've had a lot of ups and downs with that. You know, I watched the price go all the way up to like close to $70,000, and then it crashed over the next 4 or 5 months. It went back under 20, and that was not too fun to watch. But I was just so convinced that this thing is, I feel like in the long run, there's just untapped potential there. It's going to get more use and attention. So I kept buying, I guess to my own credit, and the price has gone back up, but there's no guarantee it's going to stay there. But because of all that, I do have this big pile of money. I mean, I'm not a millionaire or anything, but it's enough for me to feel like I can take time off from work and take care of myself. So I'm taking these months off to do this hiking stuff and not look at a computer every day and be outside every day, get exercise, try to relax my brain. I'll talk more about that later. And try to take care of my health. And I would say it's going really well. The Arizona Trail was like a big success for me. And that's a great milestone for me in my personal health to be able to do that whole trail. I feel as good as I did. So that's worth the investment to me. I've made a lot of sacrifices to do this stuff. So I don't have an apartment right now. All of my possessions are in my car. And that's been hard because it's really, I don't have a consistent social network of people I can see every single day. So I'll talk more about how I'm working to fix that problem. again, I'm taking small steps that are working right now. But what I want to talk about now is how I plan to use my whatever financial independence I have, which I hope I will maintain. So a lot of this is dependent on the value of Bitcoin, and if it crashes again, I won't be able to do a lot of this stuff. But the whole goal for me is to just become completely financially independent, which really means, again, I said that we depend on money for stuff right now, but you know, vegetables don't grow out. You don't water vegetables with like dollar bills. You don't need money to grow vegetables. And so basically my plan is to buy a bunch of land, hopefully, and start gardening and farming. I want to start growing my own food, and I want to get off this whole money system completely. I don't know if that'll ever happen, but I want to get a lot closer than I am right now. And I want to start replacing dependence on money with dependence on other people who I care about and who care about me. So the deal with this farm thing is, like, again, why is it that we go to work for 8 hours a day and leave all the people that we love when we can be out farming and gardening together? And we're doing something that's enjoyable. We're outside, we're cultivating life. It's a simple task, and we can do it with people, and we can talk to people that we like while we're doing that. So I really believe that can be my daily existence, and that can become my work every day. And I really believe that the work I do every day can be enjoyable and good for me, and that we don't have to grind ourselves down at these jobs like we are right now. We can do stuff that's beneficial and going to help us grow as human beings. So that's really the long-term vision. I'm hoping to have this thing, I hope to start this farm thing by next summer. So that's why I don't want to do this hiking thing again, because I want to start spending my time around other people, and I want to start putting down roots and putting in work that I can benefit from in the future, planting those seeds literally and figuratively. And I want you all to be a part of this. I want people to just come and visit me for at least a little bit at first, and eventually over time I would love to have this be a thing where people can take time off from work for a few months and come live at the farm. It's going to be simple living. I sleep outside out here, and I plan on doing that a lot the rest of my life as conditions allow. But that keeps it low cost, and it keeps us connected to the earth. That's another big part of this, is that we are human beings, and we are physical creatures just like any other animal, and we need contact with the earth to really be happy and healthy. So these are all the things I want in my life, and I want you all in my life in a significant way, and I want you all to be a part of this to whatever extent possible. Everyone, again, has these constraints, but even if you can all participate from afar, or I don't know what direction this whole project will take, but I would love to just be able to share that experience with people, share this experience of enjoying nature and sleeping outside, cooking food over a campfire, and then working together to cultivate life and provide for ourselves, become more self-sufficient, and start to take this power back to ourselves, the power over our own lives, because we want to be happy. I want to be happy. I know you all do too. And these people dealing with trillions and trillions of dollars, they just care about money. And so it's up to us, really. So today, I don't have, there's no easy fix to this. This is going to take a long time, and it's not going to happen overnight. Trust me on that. But we can start taking small steps in this direction, and this is what I intend to do, and I will keep you posted. All right, I made it to my camping spot for day 2 on the trail. I'm probably not going to record as much over the next 2 or 3 days, just because you kind of have a sense of my daily routine at this point. So that's what I'm going to be doing for the next few days. And as far as the monologues go, I've gotten a couple of those out there, so I don't want to front load those too much. I want to save some for later in the trail. So I'll still give you a taste of the scenery and stuff as I go along, and I'll check in as I'm getting closer to Jefferson. Hey everyone, I'm just about at Kenosha Pass, which is where I'm going to hitchhike to Jefferson and pick up the food package that I sent to myself. So everything's going well so far. I would like to record more of kind of the day-to-day stuff, but it's just the size of these video files is so huge that it's a challenge for me to upload them, given that I have weak internet connections. So you'll get a sense of what it's like to be out here throughout the course of this whole video blog over the next month. So hope you're enjoying things so far, and I'll talk to you later.